Good evening. Welcome to another program sponsored by the Guyana. Hello. Yeah. This forum is being sponsored by a group of Guyanese who are resident in the United States, Canada, UK, the Caribbean, and in Guyana. Today, our topic will be on the forestry sector and, in particular, the value added products of that sector. Usually, there is much publicity about oil, economics, and politics in Guyana, but the forestry sector is not given the significance that it ought to, given its role in the transformation and development of Guyana. So today, what we have one of the people who is very knowledgeable in the forestry sector, who is involved and who is also involved in the transformation of this sector as our guest. He is Mr. Rafeek Khan, who is the managing director of Juravilla Homes, and he also manages another company. Of course, he's also the vice president of the Guyana Manufacturer Services Association of Guyana, and he might hold other positions as well in Guyana. So we want to welcome him. Before he starts, first of all, let's welcome him to the program, the Guyana Dialogue. Yeah, this is Mr. Rafeek Khan, and our panelist today is Dr. Ganga Ramdas, who is a former head of the
Hello.
Department of Economics and International Relations at Lincoln University, University of Pennsylvania. Um, our regular host, Shamiza Ali, is off today. So, Mr. Rafeek Khan, we welcome you. We know you're very busy, and we thank you for being on this program. Before you start, um, I would like you to talk a little about, I know you're engaged. The energy conference begins on the 18th of February, and you are playing an integral role in that. I believe you will be displaying some of your products. So let's give a brief summary of your participation in G conference as it's linked to the forestry sector and value added.
Thank you for this opportunity, Dr. Singh and colleagues on the panel here. Before we start, I just wanted to talk a little bit about that. Thank you. The Energy Conference, as you know, is where the entire Guyana economy is developing and helping the other economies within the global sense of value adding. We'll talk a little bit about how the oil and gas economy will really help forestry sector. But with regards to this energy conference, this is our company's third time participating in the energy conference. So within the last 3 years, we have really, even though we're a forestry-based company, we have seized the opportunity to be part of the energy conference mainly because we want to be able to attract international audience to understand that there are companies in Guyana that is actually focused on working towards the non-oil sector, because it's going to take the oil sector to build out the non-oil sector, and I'll explain that a little bit more during the program. So that is the show that's going to be happening, the expo. They're going to be a supply chain conference, which means everyone who is supplying towards the energy conference, food, logistics, housing, and so on, they will be exhibiting companies there to be part of the entire supply chain for the energy conference. So we seize this opportunity every year. As a matter of fact, 2 years ago, we built an entire house at the energy conference. And because of that one house that we built at the energy conference, we had Prime Minister Mia Mottley from Barbados and various other prime ministers stop by, and we got an order just because of that opportunity, because you're really attracting regional leaders to understand what is it that we're doing in Guyana. So as a private sector leader and within our industry and company, We really appreciate the opportunities for these expos because we have an opportunity to really showcase in country rather than going outside of the country to showcase our products. It's a lot easier when we have an audience in Guyana coming from the international area. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Yes, talk a little about a brief overview also of the forestry sector, where it's going. I know that last year, 2024, was probably the first time you had built prefab home for export. So if you want to comment on that as well, please go ahead.
So, to put things in context, let's say within the last 40 years or so, 4 decades, the forestry sector as a whole has been mainly working from moving from natural resources being just the log, the raw material, sorry, and Guyana has been constantly decreasing in log export and increasing in value added production. And that has been the mission for us in Guyana as private sector leaders. We want to be able to gain more from our natural resources. So if you're cutting, let's say, a truckload of logs, if you sell a truckload of logs to India or China, the value of that truckload of logs, without adding any value added, is just going to be about 10,000 US dollars. Whereas if you were to convert that truckload of logs into dimensional lumber, you're not even talking about further processing. We're talking about the first stage of production from logs to lumber, to rough sawn lumber. And just by doing that alone, you're moving towards almost doubling the revenues you will get from a container load of lumber that you're going to sell. So can you imagine if you were to utilize labor in country, helping towards the gross domestic production in the country, by just converting our raw material into more value added. And that has been the objective for, I would say, the broad objective for the Guyana Forestry Commission and the stakeholders within the forestry sector, to be able to keep growing their businesses by increasing revenues in a way of increasing value added. If we keep just exporting raw material, we're not going to be seeing our profitability as we would like to see it. We would not be having employment. We would not be increasing our GDP in the country. So from a broad perspective, that is where we're looking at increasing value added each year. Now, it is challenging, but we're seeing the possibilities is near. And why am I saying that? Why it was the major challenges we would have had in the last 4 decades, or even 5 decades, from reducing log export, hopefully one day banning log export, but reducing log export and increasing value added. The biggest challenge in moving towards that shift of value added is the cost of production in Guyana. Where does the cost of production hampers our sector in the forestry sector? Mainly, it has been logistics, because moving raw material from the hinterlands of Guyana to a sawmill to process it into value added, a truckload of logs is, as in transportation wise, the cost of transportation is as much as 50% of that entire load of raw material coming. So if you're spending most of your cost of goods sold, cost of production in logistics costs, you're not going to be competitive. So what we see happening now, and why the opportunity is actually great now for any company seeking to enter into value added, is that logistics costs is going to be decreased by at least 50% because of the infrastructure work that is being put in place for moving your logs from the forest to your sawmill. Then the next area we're going to see where cost is going to be reduced, which has been a hindrance before, is actually energy. So energy costs in producing sawmill, any lumber products, is as much as I would say 10 to 15% of your input of your manufacturing. We're hoping that by the end of this year and continually next year, in the next 2 3 years, you're going to see energy costs coming down that will help companies consider more value added. The what we did gain in the incentive in helping us with the value added, sorry, with the energy cost, is a subsidy because the government would have removed all taxes from fuel that companies now have the opportunity to help bring down their energy costs. But I'm hoping that it's going to be even 50% less after gas ashore on board. Talking now about more about energy, how do we reduce our energy costs is by taking wood waste as well, putting it into our operation to create energy. So these are all things we'll talk about in terms of value added. So in a macro view, where Guyana was and where we're going is that more companies have opportunities now to invest in value added than before. Now, I want to put it into context. What is value added? We hear this word, but we don't really put it into context in terms of Guyana. One may say value added is flooring, is furniture, is molding, is doors, is cabinets. That is the ultimate gratification of value added by converting our raw material to finished products. But in context of Guyana and competitiveness and where economies are right now and where the people, those in manufacturing, their businesses right now may not be at the stage to compete with the developed countries like Brazil, like Indonesia, for example. So these Guyana is getting there, but what we need to do, put it into context. So for me, I would say we need to at least look at converting that log into a dimensional timber targeted towards a consumer right now that we have that is willing to buy our timber. And that is for hydraulic and engineering application, housing, framing, housing and roofing. You have decking. These are applications that you don't really have to go into sophisticated value added. So let's talk about the external of the home. Let's talk about the structure of the home. Let's talk about sea defense and port and marine construction. And that is where Guyana would have had its claim to fame as being the only country in the world with a species called greenheart. And greenheart has been pioneered by the British, used by the Dutch, and first went into the UK, then to the Netherlands. And because of that, municipalities around the world has recognized that greenheart coming from Guyana is the only natural resource timber product that you can put it into a marine environment without treating. As a matter of fact, you cannot even treat the timber. So Guyana has a very unique advantage as what is it that we have that is important that we can play to our strengths, and that is the niche. There's a limited amount of species in the world. As a matter of fact, there's only 3 species in the world that is resistant to marine borers and decay. The Staten Island Ferry uses greenheart. The Brooklyn Bridge uses greenheart. A lot of the marinas and fenders that are being utilized across the globe, but right in New York, the government of New York uses greenheart because they have recognized that it is an environmentally friendly timber requires no treatment, does not harm the environment, and could be utilized. So that is where I would like to see us moving first in our episode to talk about the first stage of value added. And then I will explain where we need to go into further value added and where our hindrances are. Because we do have hindrances, consumer choices, and so on and so on. So I'll pause for the moment as you may have some
Yeah,
questions as I give you
yeah,
the overview.
yeah. You spoke about you get some tax concessions. Can you please let the viewers know what are the various type of tax incentives the forestry sector have access to?
Yes, thank you. The forestry sector as a whole has been advocating, and through the Guyana Manufacturer Services Association, we have been advocating for a decade now or more for incentives. Within the last 5 years, we would have received incentives that would have helped the forestry sector become more encouraging towards value added. And here are some examples. For example, if you're going to buy machinery to produce any forestry products, the tax laws allows for that company to apply for incentives for zero duties on machinery and equipment that going into the forestry sector, molders, sawmill, and so on. Furthermore, those who are involved in the actual logging, you can apply for incentives where your skidders, your tractors, your trucks, there's no duties on those type of equipment that goes into the production of forestry production. Packaging equipment, if you're using any, or sorry, packaging material, if you're using any packaging material for your input towards manufacturing, those as well, taxes have been removed. One of the greatest benefit that we would have received actually in the last, I would say 15 years at least, was the removal of VAT on wood going towards building and construction. Removal of VAT. So if you're going to purchase timber towards building and construction for any type of application when it comes to structural, there's no tax on those type of material. However, a big however, which we would like to advocate in the hopefully in coming months and next year again when we have the opportunity, is to remove value added tax on manufactured products that goes into value added. For example, if you're going to buy molding or cabinets or doors, we would like to see the sector get a bit of a break, that the consumer don't have to pay additional taxes if they're going to use a made in Guyana product. And this is where I will see a greater buy-in from consumer if we could become more competitive versus the imported products that we're seeing coming in. So those are some incentives that
Yeah,
we have presently.
yeah, okay. Before I pass on to Dr. Gunn, let me ask you a final question in this segment. Do you know how many people are employed in the forestry sector? You have an idea?
Yes, within the forestry sector, it's approximately 24,000 employment throughout the country,
Hmm. Okay, thank you. Dr. Gunn?
primary and secondary.
Okay. Dr.
Okay,
Gunn?
thank you, Dr. Tara. Mr. Rafeek, I take a slightly different approach to this. The value added makes sense that you have outlined. However, we have to be cautious, as you pointed out, with our costs. If our costs rise, then the profits that might be shown would be just a reflection of the subsidies. So I want to go back to a work that was published. It was called Profits Without Plunder. So, can you outline how we can manage the forest as a natural resource so that um, we can manage and utilize it sustainably and profitably?
Thank you for that question. And there's a great misconception out there about Guyana's production in its forest. Within our entire forest, we are the government of Guyana has allocated a certain percentage for production, and that percentage is approximately 1.2 million cubic meters per annum, in keeping with sustainable harvesting practices. So when you go in and cut a tree from the forest, the second generation can go back and see a live active forest. So we're not clear cutting, number one. We do selective cutting. But the allocation given for to do logging is less than 1% of Guyana's forest is allocated for logging. And even with that 1% that we have been allocated, well, we're allocated 1.2 million cubic meters to cut per annum. We are only producing, as of last year, 470,000 cubic meters of production in the forest. What that means is that we are underproducing, grossly underproducing our allowable cut, that actually is hindering the growth of the sector and the promotion of the sector and the sustainability of the sector, because we need to cut the trees, or else they're going to fall, they're going to damage other trees, people are going to plummet the forest for charcoal, and so on and so on. So we're underproducing, and Guyana right now has the lowest deforestation rate in the world. It is among the country with the lowest deforestation rate by 0.05%. 0.05% is our deforestation rate in the world. So I'm glad for the viewers to really understand, in context of Guyana and the global economy in the world, that we are really underutilizing our forests presently for value added by not producing sufficient enough for our growing economy.
Yes, so from a management point of view, what you have outlined makes a lot of sense. I commend you for that. It's a bit of a relief to learn about that. What I would ask further is about domestic consumption versus exports in those markets. If you could show how we are managing so that we don't, for example, tie our production rates to the Chinese markets because they could consume the whole forest in less than a year. So, how do we arrange and manage our affairs so that we are sustainable and we are profitable for the next couple of generations?
Yes. So what the government would have has been doing over the last, I would say, 30 years, is moving towards reducing log export. So within the last, let's say, 15 years for sure, the government has been gradually adding tariffs, taxes, towards any country who seeks to buy logs from Guyana. It has been moving from 5 to 10, and now it's all the way up to 20 to 22%. If you were to export logs to any country, you must pay, you will be paying as much as 22% in taxes. However, if you're exporting rough sawn lumber, you're only paying 2% to the government of Guyana in taxes. And guess what? If you're doing value added, meaning kiln dry product, dressed and machined, decking, flooring, siding, homes, you pay zero taxes for the export. So what we're really doing as a country and as private sector, we advocated that we have sufficient raw material in country for anyone who wishes to come into Guyana and do value added. So the incentives are there. And what we have been seeing, we've been seeing more consumption locally than export. Because as you know, Guyana's economy is bursting at the seam for construction and civil works. So at the moment, we have had, unfortunately, a decline in exports for both logs and value added because the consumption locally, domestically, has risen as much as 30 to 40%. So companies are targeting opportunities within the country where timber is using significantly. Now, over the next 5 years, when Guyana stop building out in the pace that we're going, we need to position ourselves back towards export. This is why now is the time for us to really build out value added and don't become dependent on the economy that is building today. We have hotels, we have hospitals, we have schools, we have residential homes that are building that we are not selling to right now value added. We are importing a lot of our doors, a lot of our flooring, a lot of our furniture. Why? Is because as private sector companies, we did not seize the opportunity timely enough to scale up our businesses to capture the domestic market in value added.
Oh, that's relieving as well. That makes a lot of sense. So let's focus a little bit on the profitability in the sector. So first I will start with opportunity, and then I will move to another question relating to the choice of technology. So the opportunity, and this thinking in terms of UG graduates. If you're not your businesses necessarily, but the sector can train about 100 UG students to be operating in the sector, start new businesses, for example. That's the main focus. And how would you address that issue? Training UG students to enter into the forestry sector. What can they do?
So training has been a big challenge, and we have found a lot of the graduates moving more towards the service industry, the construction industry, and not going into forestry and these, I would say, traditional sectors. You have a decline of graduates in any of the natural resource sector as a whole. Those who have been very specialized in the forestry sector have gotten old, are retiring. So we do want to increase the pace in terms of having more graduates becoming specialized in our forestry sector, and not just forestry as a whole. In terms of our entire, I would say, forest economy, because our forest economy is more than just logging. Our forest economy involves climate services, it involves agroforestry, it involves biodiversity, it involves tourism. So the forest plays such an integral role with Guyana's economy because most people, most tourists that comes to Guyana don't come to Guyana to be in the city. Most tourists comes to Guyana to go to the hinterlands to experience our forests, our pristine forests, to experience our biodiversity. So I would like to advocate and suggest highly that we have graduates getting involved generally in the broad aspect of forestry, biodiversity, environment, and so on.
Oh, that's a very commendable objective. I hope they would take that as a challenge. Um, the question I want to address is the cost side, and this has to do with the choice of technology. Now in Pennsylvania, there I visited steam-driven sawmills. They had it on display. So the slabs that you get after you take it off to make sawn lumber, the slabs and the sawdust can be converted into steam and drive the belts that would drive the sawmills, and that could lower the cost. As you address this, there's a suspicion lurking in my mind that some people might want to enter the industry just to benefit from the government subsidies, especially fuel subsidies. And you have to make sure you monitor that so they don't sell gallons and drums of fuel as a sawmill owner and so on. We had a big fire like that somewhere, and I immediately flash back and say, "Oh my gosh! I hope it's not the government subsidy being burnt out there." So, can you address the choice of technology, how we're moving? I know you mentioned oil, but you can elaborate.
Very good question there, Dr. Ramdas, and observation. What has happened, unfortunately, to Guyana's industry overall in almost every sector? We would have invested, companies would have invested in what they could have afforded. And what has happened? Most companies invested in what would have been discontinued or rejected from the developed world. In Guyana, you will see old sawmill equipment from Europe, from the United States. These equipment, some of them are not safe, and they do not give good recovery, and it's hard to maintain them. And most of all, it requires more labor. So when countries not reject or discontinue because of growing economies in other world, over the last 5 decades, you will see technology in Guyana used still today that would have been discontinued by the rest of the world. What we need to do is move away from that thinking and don't think because it's cheap or affordable, it's good for my business. We also need to move away from the thinking that, oh, if we employ a lot of people, we're doing good. We're not competitive if we do not automate, if we do not have transfer of technologies from the developed countries into Guyana. We will not become competitive if we do not use the right type of saw to reduce wastage. If we're using a chainsaw, and we do now in some places, if we use a chainsaw to cut dimensional lumber, the saw curve, can you imagine how much sawdust is dropping on the ground that does not go into wood? So companies have been moving away from using circular mills and chainsaw into more bandsaw cut. That's the first technology transfer from the developed world that have been happening over the last, I would say, 15 to 20 years, more bandsaw. Now we want companies to start using more green chain, automation in moving your lumber and sorting it out. So you're reducing on labor and relying more on the technology. Then you have kiln drying technology, because you cannot talk about value added, you cannot talk about furniture if you do not have proper seasoned timber, if you do not have kiln dry material. So what we want to do is invest in more creative ways to dry wood. We kiln dries. It's like a big oven. You put the wood in, and sometimes it can take as much as a month to dry. But there's new technology now that you can dry the wood within a week. In the old days, we air dry wood. and it is very slow in the production chain. So we are moving towards kiln drying. There's several companies in Guyana that we're kiln drying timber right now. I mean, our company, we kiln dry wood that goes into our homes. And the product is not going to last long if you do not have seasoned timber to go into building and construction. So it is important that we think automation. We have the companies from Europe, United States, even China, that are bringing technology to Guyana, and the cost is coming down drastically. So it's becoming more affordable. We want to promote that even further.
Thank you for that. I'll pass you to Dr. Tara, then I'll come
Okay.
back to the parts of the house and the species of the timber.
Okay. um, Mr. Khan, I'm referring back to what you said that although the government has allocated 1.2 million cubic meters of forestry products, you're only able to, you and your partners are able to utilize 483,000 cubic meters for last year. And that symbolizes a 4.6% growth in the forestry sector. That is not much. But coming back, why is it local companies are not buying more value added? For example, the government has a housing program. It's not part of the manifesto, but they're building homes for different categories of people. I think they might have built about 2,000 by now. Why the government is not buying? The government should start this, and they should start buying value added from local manufacturers to use in these homes, and that will set the chain reaction where other private people can come afterwards as a start. I'm just thinking about that. I would like to hear your thoughts on that, but before you go into that, just tell us what are the main species of wood that are being processed or you think about utilizing in value added.
So in value-added species, I would say as a whole, we normally hear about 5 species of wood. Guyana has over 1,000 species, but about 5 species are commonly known to the average buyer. And why is that? Is because those 5 species are very abundant, and those five species are easy to determine its durability. Green heart, purple heart, mora, wallaba, kabakali. Those species are commonly known to most consumers in Guyana. We have about 21 species that are commercially viable that you can access. And we can even take it further, that to be at least 50 species if necessary. But what is the hindrance? Why is it that companies are not utilizing what you call lesser used species, or sometimes referred to as lesser known species? So for the last couple of decades, Guyana has been advocating and promoting, and the international community around the world actually, there's a major push to what you call LUS, lesser used species. Because by utilizing lesser used species, you're having more diversity in the mix within our forests, you're maximizing and having better yield from our forests, and you're not over harvesting certain species. So what we want consumer to do is to embrace other species. And I'll call some of those species name out here. I have a little cheat sheet here. There are 5 categories of species that you have. Category 5 is actually the hardest and the most dense species. Then you have category 4, you have category 3, 2, 1. 1 will be softwood, right? But an example of species that some may know in category 5 would be mora, would be wamara, would be black cacarali, would be tonka bean. You don't hear about these species. You hear about mora, but you don't find homeowners using wamara, for example. Why? Is because it is so hard you can't even nail it. But the Chinese have found a way to use wamara, one of the most beautiful wood, because they would have invested in technology to utilize wamara to make furniture. Category 4 would be greenheart, of course. But what are some other lesser used species that we need to consider for category 4 for building and construction? Fucadi, locust, burrata, Itiki Shibadan, Tatabu, Lemonabali, Tornero. Category 3 for furniture grade wood, crabwood, Hubabali, Suya, Muniridan, Mani, Darina, cowwood. Category 2 for lesser softer woods would be Ducali, Itabali, Baramali, Wadara. By the way, Baramali is used to make plywood in Guyana, as you may know, by a company, Barama, the only plywood producing company here. So the other category 2 light wood will be also Determa. Finally, category 1 to make matchsticks, to make pallets, and some of these things. Duca, Futi, Futui, red cedar, Dali, Simarupa. So we have so many species, and what I just called out to you, there's already research done in these species by Troppenbos, ITTO, international organizations, and we have data to back these species that they could be used into various applications. But to answer your second question, why is it that we are not utilizing it? It's because we don't have enough operators in the sector that is focused on working towards these other species. The primary species is easy to sell because it is higher in demand. The other species, which our company we're utilizing, the other species, it takes time to work with it. You have to dry it. You have to convince the consumer that it's going to work. So this is where we find that utilizing species of lesser use is going to be important. And at Durvilla Homes, we're trying our best to use at least a dozen species from the mix into our homes. In terms of the consumer now, before I go to your next question, pause. The biggest consumer in Guyana at the moment is actually government. Government is our number one consumer. And they're utilizing species of wood that goes towards infrastructure work, civil work, sea defense work. And these species are being utilized to helping a lot of local contractor get in the business of sawmilling. But we need more companies now to start using the lesser used species and start doing more value added. So the government now will see, wow, we have companies that are making doors. Let's put a policy in place to restrict the importation or put taxes on the importation of doors, flooring, molding. But you cannot do it now because we don't have enough companies, or we're not producing sufficient enough value-added products to make it affordable for the average consumer. Right now, if you want to buy greenheart flooring, you're paying perhaps as much as $4 per square foot finished premium flooring, between $3 to $4 actually per square foot. But you can get engineered flooring for $2.50 a square foot, already pre-finished, ready to install. So the consumer has a choice to make. Should they buy that expensive hardwood that is produced locally for flooring, or do they buy the imported wood? But if we have more companies and more production happening for flooring, economies of scale will help bring the price down and make hardwood products in Guyana more affordable.
Okay, Dr. Ganga.
Yes, Rafik, you have touched on all the things plan to ask about, that which is a good sign. I would mention, to start with, like Kabakali, Dukadali, Silver Valley, and Simarupa, and all those. I learned about those at the Guyana Museum. They have those examples there. So here, right up front, UG students can join the tourist sector and create, like a framed picture and sell that with all the different species, and you put some name. It's in the museum, okay, right behind the Bank of Guyana. So we can have that. The next thing is about drying. We can use calcined bauxite to invent a local kiln. And we know about kilns because they use it in Asia all the time in their ovens. My father used to make ovens and line it with the metal grade 28 caliber grade metal from the factory. So I know that you can make ovens with that, but you can make kilns also. If you can make an oven, you can make a kiln and use the calcined bauxite. So you have that, and I'm happy to learn that government has finally, or has continued the use of green heart to make wharves. But I would like them to use Wallaba, both for shingles and flooring, walls, and so forth. Use the Wallaba species, and then the Amerindians know how to slice it up nicely to make shingles. We sold shingles from Covent Garden to a lot of places, Diamond Estate, and so on. So I know the bundle, how it is, the weight of the whole bundle. And then bridges, to build a nice, solid, strong bridge that would last. All you need is a derrick, a winch, and a monkey. And the monkey and the winch and the timber, you make the strongest bridge. Our front bridge was made like that because we had three trucks that transported different kinds of lumbers. And I know about the slabs because we also sold the slabs for fencing, and also for fuel. Sometimes people buy it just to burn in their fireside. So there is so many uses that could turn into opportunity right in Guyana, and I'm happy to learn about the tariffs, which is on a sliding scale. So as you move from the sawn log, you slice out the wrong part to make your slabs, and you get that. I think they should go a step further and just ban the export of the square log unless you can get a good price for it, and Guyana owner timbers would have the incentive to do more value added in Guyana. We have to look at that part, the incentives to the owners of these new businesses, and they could take a look. You mentioned in the conversation, doors are imported. We will have the best looking doors with Wamara. I've built that in Republic Park. Both the floors and the walls and everything very nicely decorated. We don't have to send that to China. We just get the technology, bring it to Guyana, and get new people to open up new businesses, and they can specialize in terms of walls, floors, framing. I used to go to it's Eccles, at the sawmill, and ask Mr. Anderson to cut my 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 my, my, fl- my lumber for the framing of the house, right? All of them, and then you have step boards, green heart step boards, and of course you mentioned the expanding furniture business. You can start with the Mora and the other softwoods that you mentioned there. You had a whole list: crabwood, and other species. So the opportunities should be advertised more, and the education of students, they need to know more about this. I relate to the species from the museum, and that lived within me all the time. Plus, we sold some of those species ourselves. And then in America, of course, plywood. We have to look at that, how we can regenerate forests to make the plywood, because there are different types of plywood, you know, from smooth cupboards and other things, tabletops, and then you have flooring. It's used quite a lot in America. Home Depot, you go there, you see all the different types of plywood. So we can use these species and mobilize them to make plywood. And of course, Silver Valley. I had bought my Silver Valley to make boats to sail those canals in Republic Park. I'd hope they didn't fill it up to put the houses there. But Silver Valley can make boats. You can export Silver Valley boats for recreational purposes and so forth. So there are lots and lots of opportunities. I,
Yeah, but I do want to respond to a couple of points that you raised, which were very good. The government, you mentioned putting taxes on squares. A buyer cannot buy squares from Guyana, from any country, unless they show that that square is going into hydraulic and engineering application. Before it wasn't that case, but now, well, within the last several years, you must show proof that you're not going to resaw those squares into lumber, into flooring, and so on. So there's a tax in that. You mentioned Wallaba, and this is very good for the users. Most people know Wallaba as a cheap wood. Lantern posts or transmission posts, fence posts, 4x4 fence posts, or staves. But you'll be surprised to know and see the properties of Wallaba and the God-given natural inherent properties, that it's even resistant to fire, resistant to decay, of course, termites. So if the consumer already know you can use Wallaba poles in the ground without rotting, much less how well would it do for building and construction? So our other company, Durable Wood Products, we produce Wallaba shingles that goes around the world to compete with cedar shingles. So many people know cedar shingles, but Wallaba shingles would outlast cedar shingles 3 times, and it's the same price as cedar, or sometimes less. And you don't have to treat the Wallaba. You have to treat cedar to last a long time or become fire resistant. So this is like an ultimate value added product that we do. And there's several companies in Guyana that produces Wallaba shingles, but the whole idea about value added is to take a product that has been tested and proven for over, I would say, 100 years, that is used to transmission pole, and now it's covering some of the most prestigious roofs around the world in hotels and resorts around the world. You mentioned plywood. Guyana produces plywood, but I 100% agree with you. We need to take it a step further and start having veneer ply and other types of ply, that we having even more utilization of our beautiful woods, because many people don't want to have a thick slab of wood to do their construction. They would love to have a thin slice of veneer to make their cabinets and so on. But that requires investment, and that requires companies with bold, I would say, being confident and bold in the economy to know that they can go ahead and invest. And At the moment, as you know, we have been pitching our forest as a whole, as a country as a whole, to investors. The many people see other sectors as being more lucrative, but I would say the forestry sector, if done correctly, value added, if produced in a larger scale, you can't come into the sector and invest a 500,000 or $1 million. You need to come here with an ambition to say, okay, if I invest two, three, four, $5 million into the sector, you'd be surprised to see what you can get out of market protection and demand locally in our economy. The last point I want to mention about further utilization of our raw material is that coming out of the wood waste, we need to have students testing and seeing how they can use our fall downs, our sawdust to make other products, other byproducts that can come out of these waste. For example, in India, I see they make food boxes out of wood waste, out of bamboo, out of a lot of knives or spoons and forks are made out of softwood and bamboo. These are the things that we need to take value added further. And by doing more value added, which is the focus of our program here tonight, what you're doing good for the environment. You're utilizing more of our waste, or let's say fall down, and getting greater value from that tree. So the trees that we're cutting today, let's say 480,000 or so cubic meters, could actually, if we utilize, let's say 70 to 80% of that tree, versus right now, we may be utilizing about 45 to 55% of that tree. We need to be utilizing more of it by taking the waste into other products.
Yeah, I want to, right now at my home, for cooking, all the spoons we have are made of wood. Every spoon, not one silver, the type of silver that people use or bronze. All the spoons are made of wood. So Guyanese can do that as well. And bamboo, you mentioned about bamboo. My floor is made of bamboo. So bamboo can grow easily in Guyana. It is grown.
Mhm.
So bamboo is something that I don't know if you have looked into it or other manufacturers, but that might be a good and very durable. Very last time my floor is I don't know. I will die and leave it there.
Yeah, well, the government of Guyana is doing a research now on bamboo. For those who may know bamboo, bamboo is actually an invasive species. If you're not careful, it can actually do more harm than good. But you have to plant the right species of bamboo. They actually use bamboo right now to hold back the vegetation of erosion of soil and so on. It is very, very important to the environment. But if we harvest bamboo and we complete the study properly and we have investors to do plantation bamboo, it grows fast and it's a very, very durable timber. So that's a good point. And then I do want to mention there's tree planting, so we replant. There's a lot of species that are being planted in our forest. There's a major project with that. There's actually a major project with regards to planting trees from our forest in the city of Guyana. You would have heard 50,000 trees that are going to be planted over the next couple of years within our cities and coastal areas. So the beautification project is happening, but what this does, it helps more in promoting the species and even the lesser used species, because we can actually plant some of these species within our and they're flowering within the city. So there's some beautiful tropical hardwood species that we can educate. If you ever remember going to the botanical garden and you go through that garden, there's a lot of species that came from other countries and even came from our forest that is actually planted in the gardens. So definitely much work needs to be done in educating consumers about
Yeah,
opportunities within the forestry sector and
yeah,
value added.
yeah. I share the view, Dr. Dan. I share the view. Education, especially among our high school and university students, of the value of the forestry sector, including value added and the potential that exists here. That should be in the part of the training, I believe, or exposure at least. Now, we've come to the end of our program, and I know this has been very informative and educational, and I hope that Guyanese will show great interest in the forestry sector and understand the significant role it's playing in national development and in the transformation of Guyana. Um, I'll ask you now to do your closing statement.
So my closing statement is quite simple. I just want the consumer to embrace a made in Guyana product. Consider twice, but it is important that the consumer understand grade and quality and knowing what they're buying. And finally, I would like to mention some good news. The Guyana Manufacturer Services Association has recently embarked in a study between the EU and EU government, and also sponsored by FAO, Food and Drug Administration, to be able to conduct a study of value added primarily in the furniture sector. This feasibility study, and not just a feasibility study, I would say an assessment within the furniture sector. Once we have this bona fide report ready, which I'm thinking within the next 2 months or 3 months, this report, next that we have an opportunity to air, I will then give you some good findings of the report, not just based on how we feel or how we think or what we think. We're going to go through the entire country and understand where furniture is being used, what species, and what needs to be done to promote and help the smaller stakeholders and operators, and what you call the bottom house operators and manufacturers, get a better voice and a better opportunity to sell their furniture products and promote it more, and even helping them financially through fiscal incentives, loans, and grants, and so on. Thank
Well,
you very much.
thank you very much. You're doing a terrific job for the promotion of the forestry sector, both as an entrepreneur and as an active member of the GMAC, and of course, you have intimate knowledge of the forestry sector as well. Dr. Ganga, you want to make a final
Yeah, I
statement?
want to thank Rafeek for giving us such a wealth of information. This has been an education for me personally. Of course, I came with the background there, but I want to extend the message to our young people that if you look at the house and the various parts, on each part you can create a business and specialize in that. You can make doors, as you mentioned. You can make cabinets. I got the wood for cabinets imported from Canada on Gafor's third floor by the waterfront there. So each part of the house can be a business. We need to look at it in that way and not be overwhelmed with the entire industry. So furniture is a good start because you can do that. Right now, I have to build my own cabinets and desktops. I've done that all in the United States and design it. If you want to learn about the design, you go into a ship. When you're in the ship, you see how they utilize space and materials, and you can form a business that would export these finished products. And I hope one day that we would not export square logs, and there's a control. But we need to keep an eye on that. So thank you very much. I appreciate it. And I hope our listeners can look at this industry in a different way and they can start at the museum, as I recall, learning about the species of wood in Guyana. Thank you very much, Rafik.
And thank you very much, Dr. Ganga. Thank you, Mr. Rafikan. Thank you, Asif, Ali, and to our viewers. Have a wonderful evening and a pleasant weekend.